The courage to confront life's absurdity. Reading Albert Camus' The Rebel. Dear readers, in our lives, we often confront the question why? Why do unfair things happen? Why must things be so difficult? Why must we live? The world gives us no clear answers and often feels like an impenetrable wall. Unlike school tests that have definitive solutions, life is often ambiguous and uncertain. Perhaps this very ambiguity is what makes us feel intimidated when we hear grand terms like knowledge and cultivation. But don't be worried. The book we are discussing, Albert Camus' The Rebel, is not one that boasts of grand knowledge. Rather, it is a book that extends a hand to help us find answers to life's most basic question: how should we live? While it may seem densely packed with complex philosophical theories, at its core, The Rebel is a thoughtful exploration of our intrinsic humanity and dignity. Don't be put off by its complexity. Simply sit back and feel how this book resonates with you through the stories I share. 1. Life's absurdity and the beginning of rebellion. Camus claims that the world we live in is fundamentally absurd. The term absurdity may sound difficult, but in simple terms, it means that although we seek meaning and purpose, the world does not provide them. From grand questions like the meaning of the universe or life and death, to humble ones like why must I suffer today, the world remains silent. It feels as if we tirelessly seek meaning in an enormous machine without rules, ultimately encountering futility and despair. Camus identifies 3 paths people take in the face of absurdity. First is the suicide, where one denies everything and gives up on life. Second is the philosophical suicide, where one clings to some transcendent belief or ideology, despite its non-existence. The third and final path is rebellion. This rebellion is not merely stubborn resistance. For Camus, rebellion is the fundamental human movement to preserve one's dignity by accepting absurdity as it is. When someone is unjustly oppressed, their freedom is violated, or their values are trampled, we instinctively cry out, "This is not acceptable." This voice is rebellion. Imagine a child yelling at their mother, "I don't like this." The child is not merely being stubborn. They are asserting their own domain and agency. Similarly, Camus' concept of rebellion is not far from this. The moment we say, "This is wrong. I reject it," we affirm our internal values, our dignity and humanity. This is significant because within that cry of no, there is an awareness that the issue is not just personal, it is a collective problem. Recognizing that when I resist injustice, others may also face the same injustice, and ultimately, I realize there is a line that must be protected as a human being. Camus' famous line, "I rebel, therefore we exist, je me revolte, donc nous sommes," precisely encapsulates this meaning. In the moment of rebellion, we no longer stand as solitary individuals but as people united with those who share the same injustice, realizing that there are values we must protect together. 2. The traps of rebellion. Going beyond the line. Thus, rebellion clearly aims at noble human values. However, Camus warns that through a close examination of human history, rebellion can sometimes lead to dangerous paths, specifically, rebellion that crosses the line into violence and mass murder. Camus analyzes 2 trends in Western philosophy and history: metaphysical rebellion and historical rebellion. Metaphysical rebellion is the movement to assert human freedom and autonomy against transcendent beings or orders like gods or fate. For instance, Prometheus defies the gods to steal fire and give it to humanity, symbolizing the human desire to chart our own destiny. The problem arises when this metaphysical rebellion declares a godless world and attempts to fill the void with human reason or ideologies, e.g., the communist ideology that promises a perfect society. Humanity then claims the absolute authority once held by gods. This is historical rebellion. Historical rebellion seeks to overthrow existing unjust systems and create a new world. Ideals such as the liberty, equality, fraternity of the French Revolution or the class emancipation of early 20th century socialist revolutions are typical examples. Initially, these movements are driven by noble goals of restoring human dignity and building a better world. However, Camus witnessed the violent justifications of bloodshed and violence during the course of these revolutions. revolutionaries believe that for the sake of their utopian future, the current sacrifices are unavoidable. Under the logic that the end justifies the means, they eliminate, purge, and even kill their opponents. When the authority once held by gods is now claimed by revolutionary forces, these leaders sit in a position of judgment over human lives, determining who lives and who dies according to their ideology. Observing the two world wars of the 20th century, the madness of fascism, and the mass purges of Stalinism, Camus experienced deep despair. Why did revolutions that claimed to liberate humanity result in such brutal killings and violence? Why did rebellions meant to defend human dignity lead to the most inhumane violence? At this critical point, Camus insists on not forgetting the limits of rebellion. 3. The true path of rebellion. Measure and solidarity. Through the tragic history of rebellion leading into violence and murder, Camus emphasizes the importance of measure. Measure signifies balance, regulation, and limits. True rebellion is not about destruction or extremism but about maintaining a boundary toward oneself, others, and the absurdity of the world. Rebellion is, indeed, the courageous act of saying no, but it must also be the act of saying no further to oneself. Camus sternly warns that when we fight against injustice, we must not become the perpetrators of violence ourselves or treat others' lives carelessly. Taking lives in the name of justice only perpetuates the cycle of absurdity and violence. It fails to break the chain we sought to confront and instead reinforces it. Take for example a people who rise up to overthrow a dictator. If the new power they establish brutalizes and purges opposing groups just as the previous dictator did, this is not true rebellion but merely a change in the face of power. True rebellion is not about merely replacing unjust power but about establishing the principle that no power can arbitrarily trample human dignity and life. This concept of measure reminds us of the importance of solidarity. Like the line, "I rebel, therefore we exist," rebellion is not an isolated cry. My resistance to injustice not only speaks for me but also affirms that this injustice can affect all humanity. Therefore, rebellion gains true meaning only when we empathize with others' suffering and stand in solidarity with them. Solidarity is more than just taking sides. It is an active attitude of recognizing and protecting each other's dignity. By listening to others' pain, viewing the world from their perspective, and pursuing justice together, we form a community of we. Within this solidarity, we transcend the isolation of absurdity and become beings capable of collectively creating meaning. Camus decisively states that no cause, regardless of how noble, can justify murder. Human life is an absolute value that surpasses all ideologies and goals. Therefore, true rebellion does not respond to violence with more violence but breaks the cycle of violence by striving to preserve the line of human dignity. 4. Implications for our lives. Living as rebellious humans now, let's consider what lessons the rebel offers for each of our lives. First, never lose sensitivity to absurdities in daily life. We often live within unreasonable rules and customs that have become so routine that we accept them as natural. We convince ourselves with thoughts like, "That's just the way things are," or "Everyone else lives like that," and ignore injustice. However, Camus encourages us to constantly question such absurdities and find the courage to shout, "This is not acceptable." Speaking out against unfair workplace practices, unjust school rules, and pervasive social discrimination is the beginning of rebellion. Second, remember that no cause can justify violence and murder. This message is particularly important in our modern society. We witness countless ideological conflicts, both online and offline. We often criticize and even use violent language against others, believing that our convictions are right. However, Camus' message is clear. Even with the most noble goals, it is never acceptable to trample on others' dignity or threaten lives. We must advocate our beliefs while always maintaining a sense of measure and ceaselessly seek dialogue and persuasion. Third, have the courage to stand in solidarity with the suffering. There are still many people in the world suffering from injustice. From refugee crises in distant countries to the stories of neighbors facing discrimination in our own communities, we encounter various forms of suffering. The rebel teaches us the importance of standing with them and crying, "This is not acceptable." Even if we cannot personally solve their problems, by listening to their stories, empathizing with their suffering, and helping their voices be heard more widely, we take the first step toward true solidarity. This is also how we safeguard the minimal human values we must protect as humans. Fourth, live a life of constant questioning and reflection. Camus does not offer us a ready-made answer. Instead, he encourages us to seek our own answers. Rather than blindly following or passively giving in to any absurdity we encounter, we must continually ask, "Is this right?" and reflect on what should I do. This process of independent thought is precisely what transforms us into rebellious humans. Isn't this what true cultivation really means? Going beyond merely accepting knowledge imparted by others, cultivating the ability to think and judge for oneself is the most essential tool for navigating this complex world. Conclusion: A Better World Through Our No Dear Readers, Albert Camus' The Rebel is not an easy book. However, the questions it raises are not distant or difficult. Instead, they are profound insights that touch the deepest parts of our lives and constantly challenge us to reflect on how we should live. The world remains full of absurdities. Injustice, violence, discrimination, and oppression continue to appear in various forms before us. However, we need not remain powerless and silent in the face of this absurdity. Within us lies the spirit of the rebellious human that instinctively cries out, "This is not acceptable." Though this cry may sound small and fragile, it contains a noble yearning to protect our collective dignity and create a better world. What is crucial is maintaining a sense of measure, standing in solidarity with those who suffer, and continuously affirming our humanity. The rebel does not offer answers but instead asks us again the question, how should we live? Through this question, it teaches us that in the absurd world, we can find meaning by living with dignity and solidarity. I sincerely hope this book awakens the rebellious human within each of you and contributes to a more courageous and thoughtful life.